happening in memory. All this is in RAM, 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 RAM. Nothing's really happening. It's just loading up all these variables. And then we get down here and we actually do something. What do we actually do? We fire this function. And this function is named after the method that we told to load, which, as I said, was this part of the URL, or the default method if the one that's loaded is not one of the ones that we have, one of the methods that we have defined. If it's loaded, if it's defined, it'll be loaded, and if it's not defined, then we'll load a default method. Okay, so what that means is it fires a controller up above. Like, say we have, in this case, we've got the menu method. So it goes up here and it fires the function named menu, which is this one, right? And you get to the bottom of this function and we load a variable with the results of another function, which is the view. And then we spit it out, return that. Okay, but the view function is here. And as I said, most of this you'll not need to ever mess with, because all that's really happening here is we're deciding if we're going to show some debug data, which you can turn on and off. There's a toggle for that. And then we just load the entirety of the page content, which is everything that's going to go to the browser, from a view file. See the v underscore here? And we were, in this case, loading this page, it turns out we're loading a view called v underscore applez's underscore end user underscore eat, because invoked view is eat, because that's what it was indicated in the menu method. Right? See the word eat there? So you could change that to whatever you want. You could have, instead of eat, you could have corporate. I just put eat because I was trying to group all the food related methods in my mind, and the views. Like, say it's a corporate website, but say everything that was related to food had one look and feel. Like, say like the big Apple's Apple logo, but say they wanted the back end for the corporate people to do all the finances and their meetings and their whatever else they do in the corporate websites, to have another view that didn't have a big Apple's logo like this, but instead it was more business looking letterhead, Apple's corporate something something. So then you might have a completely different view file for that. Instead of this one that I showed you, the Apple's end user eat, you might have Apple's end user or an Apple's corporate user. And then you would just change this to corporate. Of course, then you'd have a different controller. You'd have a controller for that too. It'd be Apple's underscore corporate. So it's a little hard to follow this. I realize it's not your code and it's not your thinking, but if you just bear with me a little bit and play with this, it'll get very familiar and very intuitive. And basically, it just shows one way to separate logic from presentation. Your view files have all the output, and the stuff that's really unique. See, like every link I go to, the header, the footer, everything's the same except this area right here in the middle. And that part is coming from right here, unique content body. And unique content body, that's being generated, its value is being filled out in the controllers. So the end user types in an URL, clicks a link, comes to a page on your website. A controller gets loaded, and a controller does whatever it needs to do, even calling up model files, these models, the m underscore, blah, 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 if it needs to do anything in those. Fills up these variables, like this one. See this? Text, controller methods, unique content body. Builds up unique stuff like, this unordered list, and then shoves it out to the view file right here. So I could have one view for all of my pages, even though this content was changing in the middle constantly. I could even have the other stuff changing. I could have everything changing, but then I'd have to have, more variables in other places. Like if the head was changing, we would be loading different JavaScript files, different style sheets. Then I would just put these things in a variable and fill that variable out, decide what's going to go into that variable in my controller, depending on certain factors. See, the nice thing about building up the pieces of your document before you spit them out to the view in text variables is that you're not committed. This is just this whole list of stuff, which appears, I don't know which one it is, but say it's this one, appears here in the page. At this point in the controller, it's not actually spit out, so I don't have to do anything. I can later down decide if this, then that, if this, then load this then load this block of HTML, and if not, then don't. I can add to it. I could even remove stuff to it, I suppose, if I had to. But you're in total control, so that's the advantage of having these views separated from your controllers. And the models too. Now let's look at a model example. Let's say we'll just do one. If you go to Menu and you say, show me the photos of the meal suitable for current season, you click that. It's got to go get this data from the database. And why this image is broken, I don't know. I'm going to have to look into that. I broke something. It's supposed to load pictures of the food. Anyway, this food right here is coming out of the database. And I go find where in the controller this code is. Okay, it's in the menu method of this controller, which makes sense. This controller, there's the method menu. Okay, and then the next piece is seasonal meal, which is going to be coming from this variable. Random meal or seasonal meal. Okay, if it's seasonal meal, then we're still building up our unique body content variable with, at this point, since we're in this controller, this method, and the controller param1 variable is seasonal meal, which is what comes from right here. Then we add this stuff into this variable. And this stuff is just a headline, okay, which is, that. Page title, which is up here. See? Plus the hover snippet, which is right there. Okay, and then this division, which is just right here, the image that we load, which is broken. I'm sorry, I'll have to fix that and show you again, but you'll see it later. Anyway, and then this food stuff right here. These 4 table rows, it's not in this code because I wanted to separate the model logic out from the controller. Okay, model to me means I go and do stuff. And so in this case, what am I doing? I'm going to get database records. I could, of course, stick my search right here, I could have done this. Search. Right here in my controller, I go look in something, food database, whatever, and go get those records, and then for each one, build up a table row. You're familiar with the drill, I'm sure. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I could do that right here. And for a simple website like this, a simple file like this, relatively short, just a few hundred lines of code, 246 lines of code, that's fine. But if I've got a big, long, complicated site, I don't necessarily want to do that. Or if my search is complicated, or there's different searches depending on different circumstances, I may not want to make my food controller chock-a-block full of stuff that's hard to figure out later. I like to keep the model stuff separate from the controller stuff, okay? So what I've done is I've separated it out into the model code into this one right here. Model underscore Appleseas food. And that's what we're calling right here. We're calling a function that's in that model. And we're saying, get the seasonal meal, and whatever data it gets from the database, stick it in the table. So with one line of code that's intuitive, it reads almost in English, food, get seasonal meal, data display type table. You can just know in 6 months or a year later by looking at this what it's doing without cluttering up your code. And right here, I don't want to see that stuff. I just want to see the logic that decides what's going to be showing here. Okay, and if that's a little much for you, then fine. Just stick your search right here. But if you can just spend a little more time getting familiar with this design in the long run, and especially for big projects, complicated projects, you'll probably really appreciate it. And if we were to go look in the model, we're looking for get is seasonal meal, display type data, this model, see, get random meal, no, get seasonal meal. And in the seasonal meal, we're again building up a big variable, right? Data display type is table, so it's this one. This is the block. And for each record that's found by this search, we load table rows. Okay, so again, ignore all this stuff over here. This funny looking stuff. I'll explain that later. Okay, so that's where these table rows come from. These table rows right here, they're coming from the model right here, which came from this line of code in the controller. So this line of code in the controller went and got, whoops, went the wrong way, went and got all of this, all these found items rows, right? And stuck them right here. So that all got tacked on this, this table actually, not just table rows, it was also a table. See, because before even this whole switch, oh, it's right here the whole time. Sorry. Right before the found items is the table. So it's not just these rows, it's a table too. Okay, so that whole table with all of its rows gets stuck in right here, which is basically just a concatenation after this code, and then all of that gets stuck in here, which then gets stuck in here, which is something that's passed to our view. And down here in our view function, we're building up page content, which is a conglomeration of our view file plus our page title plus our unique content body, and then it spits it out to here, right? And sticks it all right there. The part we've been talking about sticks it all right there. So that's the stream of logic that ends up from URL to controller to model to view, and then what finally becomes this source code that makes this page. Just to show you these things, it was just a path I broke. Anyway, you hover over these and it loads the image for that item. Coffee is coffee. So that's Ajax. If you want to see how I've integrated Ajax into this, you can do that. There's way better ways of doing it. It was real quick. My point of this wasn't to demonstrate Ajax, it was to demonstrate this framework that I built. I'm sure we'll do some more work on the Ajax part of it with jQuery and whatnot. So anyway, but just for those of you who don't know Ajax at all and wanted to see it working a little bit, here you go.